and we will be sharing our song tonight. It's Walk Like a Man, and hope you enjoy.
Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone.
Follow your dream, though it lead towards unknown. Life's but a shadow, once our dreams have flown. What if men cry, your dream is not our own? Your soul knows the answer. Go on alone. Give life your heart. Bless everything that's grown. Fear not the loving. All this world's your own. Make rich the soul. But once the seed is sown, seek freedom, don't linger. Go on alone. Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone. Go on alone. Go on alone.
The audience of two trades places with the choir of 8 or whatever. And this belongs to Pien. And this belongs to Okay. Thank you. Welcome, everyone.
They all seem so far away. Hello. Well, it's been quite a week, Lake Wobegon. Anybody here know what the Prairie Home Companion was? Just oh, okay, all right, very good.
They're Midwesterners.
Yeah, well, let's do a prayer together. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Friend, Beloved God,
Friend, Beloved God,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashai,
Lahiri Mahashai,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Swami Sri Yukteswar,
Beloved Master,
Beloved Master,
Paramahansa Yoganandaji,
Paramahansa Yoganandaji,
Saints of East and West,
Saints of East and West,
and our friend and guide,
and our friend and guide,
Swami Kriyananda.
Swami Kriyananda.
Guide us through turbulent times,
Guide us through turbulent times,
that we live at our center,
that we live at our center,
wherein dwells the inner peace,
wherein dwells the inner peace,
the inner light,
the inner light,
that can guide us home to Thee.
that can guide us home to Thee.
Let us be bearers of light
Let us be bearers of light
into a world of darkness.
into a world of darkness.
Om.
Om.
Peace.
Peace.
Amen.
Amen.
So, did you all bring some topics?
You brought yourselves.
I kind of wondered if you wanted to read the message you wrote that was sent out today. That it might be nice to have you
That's
actually read
thought.
that.
Do you have a phone? Or look that up?
Hmm.
I turned mine off. Yours is right there.
Oh. Okay. I will
It's a
find
good
it.
idea, actually. Yeah.
It,
Oh, Keone's got it.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So what we wrote was entitled Acts of Violence and Racism. How should we respond? The members, staff, students, and friends of Ananda share in the sadness and righteous outrage of yet another racially motivated murder. How can we not, both as people and as an organization that seeks to represent universal spiritual values, wonder how long must this continue? Our very teachings aver that we are all children of God, and that behind the appearance of our separateness lays the one divine heart. The teaching of ancient India is that we are that, Tattvamasi, the infinite spirit made manifest. How then can racial distinctions be other than superficial? Society's awareness of and intolerance of such acts of violence is growing. As with the original movement of Black Lives Matter or the Me Too movement, the outrage felt by sensitive souls reflects a growing compassion, even as it also expresses moral outrage. There is a reason for cautious optimism that attitudes and behavior are changing, for they must change. How then to respond? Anger does not quell anger. Eye for an eye leaves us all blind. Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. died defending the principle of nonviolence, non-hatred, and non-anger responses to prejudice and violence as expressions of our oneness in God's love. Their unearned sacrifices bestowed great blessings on humanity. We express our heartfelt compassion. Our hearts ache for those abused and mistreated, and we stand by them in solidarity as the world cries out, "Enough! Let's all work together to put this old hatred and distrust behind us." It is important, however, not to be drawn into fear or anger or any other form of negativity by the delusive power of mass consciousness. Those who wish to express their righteous indignation to do what they feel to do, but when we lose our own equilibrium, our own inner peace, then we too have been infected by the virus of negativity. The best thing most of us can do is to direct our sympathy, compassion, and prayers towards those who need it the most. The stress of isolation, fear, and suffering from the pandemic, and hardship and fear surrounding our economic future are already enough to trigger emotions out of proportion. Remaining therefore calm and even-minded is vital at this time. This is something each of us can do to help. Lasting change in human behavior comes from an awakening of consciousness, seeing life through the eyes of another, seeing in others our very own self. Meditation, yoga, and spiritual community are Ananda's focus, and these are by no means an insignificant contribution to positive change. Those great spiritual teachers who have inspired the worldwide work of Ananda demonstrated in their own lives the courage to accept all who were sincere regardless of their social status, often enduring taunts of their own society. The true races of humanity are based not on color, status, or culture, but in consciousness. So let us strive to uplift our own and others' consciousness in compassion, service, and devotion, in divine service and friendship. Nayaswamis, Hriman, and Padma. Thank you. Yeah. I wanted to read one thing out of the autobiography to kind of get us going. We've come back to this over the years. This is the chapter 33, Babaji, the Yogi Christ of modern India. And so Yogananda, in this chapter of his own autobiography, writes, Babaji's mission in India has been to assist prophets in carrying out their special dispensations. He thus qualifies for the scriptural classification of Mahavatar, great avatar. The Mahavatar is in constant communion with Christ. Together they send out vibrations of redemption and have planned the spiritual technique of salvation for this age. The work of these two fully illumined masters, one with the body and one without it, is to inspire the nations to forsake suicidal wars, race hatreds, religious sectarianism, and the boomerang evils of materialism. Babaji is well aware of the trend of modern times, especially of the influence and complexities of Western civilization, and realizes the necessity of spreading the self-liberations of yoga equally in the West and in the East. So, there are some things I'm sure we could share, but I would certainly want to invite your own reflections here as part of us. If maybe there are topics, questions, or comments you'd like to share. I have no lack of them. So any comments?
Well, it was really interesting that you read the chapter, or that excerpt from the chapter about Babaji, because I read that chapter last night before going to bed.
Oh, very good.
And it brought me a lot of comfort, considering the times that we're going through, to know that there is a conspiracy of goodness that's happening between Christ and Babaji to redeem our situation.
You know, Swamiji, well, Yogananda did too, but Swamiji would periodically talk about, as Yogananda did, the karma of nations, and the fact that not just we as individuals have karma, but entire nations or subgroups of people have karma. And Yogananda recognized or acknowledged that the treatment of black Americans by other Americans is one of the aspects of our karma as a nation that we will surely have a price to pay. But on this issue, I mean, isn't it, I don't know how to put it, it's not odd, but here we have an incident that, let's face it, has been repeated hundreds, thousands of times in the 200 plus years of even just American history, what to mention all the other nations on the planet. And we have the response that we do. Isn't it good news that finally Black Lives Matter? I mean, it's not that simple, I know. But in other words, we can see this karma it's like a tsunami. And it has nothing really to do with the unfortunate people involved. It has to do with things that have to work themselves out over a longer time. All of the outrage expressed cannot, in a day, in a week, all of the prayers offered cannot in a week or a day change the inexorable trends and conflicts that have been established over a very long period. You can legislate away, as we did in the 60s, civil unrights, but you can't change the hearts of people until you change their consciousness. And so I think it's in some ways heartening that such a response would take place. But, I grew up in the 60s when I thought it was all love and peace, and we gave flowers to the policemen in San Francisco, but things don't change that quickly, even in Dwapara Yuga. So I prefer to see all of this as a good sign. And then the only other comment, not the only, but the other comment I want to attach to that is I don't think we can separate this amazing response from the rest of what's happening, from the pandemic, from the fear, from the suffering, people dying, from the fear of economic consequences of our future. And of course there's an uprising and political conflicts, or at least language going on between certain countries. So we're in an atmosphere of fear, of I want to close the borders, I want to protect myself. And for America, it basically, I think historians will someday say, it started as historians do. I mean, they always pick something, and the kids have to memorize September 11th, 2001. But anyway, I think that'll be the date they pick for when the rest of the world's realities came to the shores of America. And so in other words, these things are long trends. And once in a while a fish jumps out of the water and you see the whale or whatever, but there's a lot of whales under the surface. So I think it's important for us to keep breathing and to take the long picture. And I think the long picture includes what millions of people like you and I, who aspire to peace, who pray, meditate, serve, are trying to be better people. I think that's the real news. It's not on any front page, but I think that's the most important thing.
I'm always heartened when I think about the fact that Paramahansa Yogananda lived in this country while World War II was raging on in Europe. I have a particular heritage associated with that war, coming from a Dutch Jewish family. And there were, as we know, a lot of people brutally killed during that war, helplessly, men, women, and children. And it's not as if he, threw a wrench into the gears of time to, sort of clear that all away so that we wouldn't have to experience it. He kept teaching people to meditate. He kept teaching people to know the divine within themselves. He spoke openly at rallies for integration. Many things, I talked about that a little bit last Sunday in my talk. But he also said, again, he reminded us of this, similar to this passage that Hriman just read, that the great ones were watching over things, and in fact, that they put the thought in Hitler's mind to open up the Russian front and therefore divide up his army, which eventually lost him the war. And so that thought was put in Hitler's mind. I just am so pleased to know that that's the case, that eventually made it all unravel for Hitler and come back together for goodness and good people all throughout Europe. And so it's difficult to trust the process when you're in the middle of it, because it's so intense. And we're not even in the middle of it. We're sitting here on Camino Island with friends in the living room. There's some really scary things happening out there for an awful lot of people, and it's been happening for a long time. So it's just important to remember. Just today, I mean, this is a light variation on this theme, if you'll forgive me, but I was just having my weekly meeting with Bima, who manages the East West Bookshop, and I was reflecting to him how incredibly lucky we were that we hadn't signed a new lease before, I mean, right when the pandemic hit and the shutdown happened.
Within days.
It was literally, and what had happened leading up to that is there was one place we in particularly liked, and it was in the Montlake area. And whatever we did, it just ended up not being able to happen. And so then we found this place we really liked in Kirkland. And we kept trying to move that forward, and the owner was having a surgery, and, you know, one thing led to another, and it just kept getting stalled. And, you know, a part of us was going, come on, you know, let's get this happening so we can move forward. In the moment, it seemed very frustrating to us. In the reality, Divine Mother was saving us from having signed a lease that would have cost us over $10,000 a month. All these months when our doors would have had to be shut, she was really saving us. And so we don't know, you know, we don't know what thought form Babaji is putting in the minds of people in our society to wake them up. People around the world, they are just as furious as people in America are that this tragedy could have taken place, has taken place, has been taking place for way too long. And it's bringing the world together in many ways. At least it appears that people are in support of one another. We are globally more connected, globally becoming more compassionate and aware in the process. So anyway, I just offer those thoughts, but I would love to hear what anything you all might have. And if you do have something, come to the mic. Don't all talk at once.
I have a question for you, though. Do you think when we read about Babaji and Christ, or just even in general, does the divine power interfere in the affairs of men, humanity? Or does God violate his own laws of karma when that thought was put in Hitler's mind? Was that meddling with the karma of nations? What do you think? If Babaji and Christ are planning whatever it is they're planning, are they messing with us?
I think that it's like parents with kids. They want the kids to learn the lessons, but on the other hand, if it's a crisis where the kid's going to run into the street, they don't mind reaching out and grabbing the kid. to save the opportunity to learn more lessons instead of having it be over prematurely.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Well
that's-
put.
Yeah. I think I heard Swami Kriyananda comment in respect to the little example of Hitler, but it's illustrative, is that was an idea that he was prone to. In other words, you could say karmically, Hitler was inclined to betray the very treaty he had made with Russia. Okay, that was his own inclination. And so it could be said, I've heard it said, that essentially that divine power was using the predisposed karma of that person in order to affect positive changes. So, I mean, there's no, well, I hate to say this expression, but there's no black and white answer to that, because we're all one. But nonetheless, whether it is one's true guru or God, Divine Mother, isn't going to necessarily save us. Here's where the question comes up very often, which is the combination of effort and grace. We have been blessed with a more nuanced understanding that through my effort I attract the grace. But historically, well, there were two kinds of people. That's what I always say. There's always two kinds of people. There are those who can do it themselves, and there are those who want it done for them. So it's really a both-and situation. In fact, if you look carefully, and I lost the page, if you read that carefully, it talks about together they are planning the plan of salvation for the age, meaning for those who seek salvation, for those who seek God attunement, self-realization, etc., then they have the key, the means that would be most effective during that age. So it's not like they're up there manipulating world affairs, like a puppet show. That would be a mistaken impression to take from this or anything like it. It's more that, it's very much like, finally came to me, I knew if I talked long enough, what I wanted to say would finally come out. Divine Mother uses suffering to help us, okay? Because it's through suffering that we question. It's our karma to suffer, but our response to, in other words, we generate the karma of suffering, but how we respond to it is our opportunity. Do you remember I had a knockdown, drag-out fight with Swami Kriyananda on chapter 10 of St. John. It's a whole chapter. Jesus is walking around like he did, and he comes across a blind man sitting there, and the Pharisees, his nemesis, ask him, "Well, Master Rabboni, who sinned, this man?" He was blind from birth. This man or his parents? Well, obviously, if he had sinned, he was born blind, there had to be a law of karma and reincarnation, or his parents. And Jesus sidestepped the issue of reincarnation. He said he was born blind for the glory of God. And I'll explain in a minute. Same thing with, what's his face? Job. Job suffered, but he didn't do anything karmically to suffer. The suffering came to him, the blindness came to this man, so that he could respond to it and awaken spiritually. He didn't do anything wrong. Job didn't do anything wrong. And oftentimes the word karma is just a synonym for sin in the sort of New Thought movement. And we think of it that way. People would look at Swami with all his physical issues and wonder what he did wrong. Well, it was his way of taking on a lot of our karma, but whatever it was his road to paradise, so to speak. And so it is with these things that come to us, the pandemic, Holocaust. These are, for people involved, directly and indirectly, opportunities to grow spiritually, opportunities to see a higher purpose behind the mailed glove, if you will. Not very easy to accept, not very easy to understand. But the path of faith is always to look for the silver lining, always to look for the possibility of goodness behind anything and everything. And so it is with all of this. It's like the virus itself. Somebody took offense back when I talked under certain people about all the good things I thought was happening as a result of the virus, and this person just exploded and said, "Oh, all these people dying and suffering." And, well, of course they're dying and suffering. I'm not saying that's wonderful, but in as much as it's a fact, we can also see that there is the possibility of goodness and awakening and wisdom and compassion, of which we've seen plenty from that. So I think it's important to see the long road, take the long road, do the deep breathing, and see behind troubles that there is a divine plan, not being manipulated, but that through these troubles which must come, sufficient unto the day or the evils thereof, as Jesus said, nonetheless, they can be our badge to realization for those who choose it. And lastly, out of the Holocaust, since you mentioned it, and I'm thinking of Wurmbrandt, and there were a few saints who walked out of those camps, and some who didn't walk out of the camps, but they became saints nonetheless. Not many, but if someone under the most horrible conditions one can imagine of mistreatment and abuse and so forth, torture, literally, can become a saint, if you can be nailed to the cross and forgive, it shows the nobility of the human spirit, and that's what these things offer to us, is that possibility.
But in the Bible, there's a part where Jesus says something to Judas about when he criticized Mary Magdalene for anointing his feet. And he said to Judas, "There will be poor always," and was trying to guide him to seek God in some way. So it seems like no matter what time we're in, there's always, like, this people and characters change, but the story doesn't so much. Is it like the goal is not to get it just right down here, but to use these opportunities to go inward and see God? Is that what he was saying there? Does that apply to?
Well, we're on tricky ground, aren't we, Padma? Well, because if we took that too far, we would be indifferent to the sufferings of others, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
And Jesus, if you just read his words, was anything but indifferent to the suffering of other people.
Right.
So when he happened to say that, that was the story with Judas, who did want to see the money wasted, but he didn't care a hoot for the poor. He just wanted not to see the money spent. But it is true. I mean, Jesus didn't. I mean, he's. You know, I'll tell you something even more interesting. At least I don't mean to put it that way, but
Definitely.
one of the first talks I ever gave at Sunday service. I don't know where some things come out of my mouth, right? I can't help it, but it was the passage that, "To those who have, more will be given, and to those who have little, that which they have will be taken away." And so I got up there and said, "That sounds like the Republican platform." So what does that mean? But that's what we're talking about. In other words, the poor ye shall have always doesn't mean to be indifferent, but it's a call to action, a call to energy, a call to self-effort. And that which we have will be taken is I mean, the poor we shall, and the abused and the tortured. What do we do about it? I mean, there's two questions. What do we do about it, and what do those who are persecuted do about it? Those are separate questions. But nonetheless, though it always exists, we can't spiritually turn a blind eye for that fact.
Right.
As Krishna says to a yogi feels the pangs and sorrows of all, and that has to be true. Question becomes, what can we do about someone else's karma? And I'll end with Krishna once again. It is better to fail doing your karma than to succeed rescuing someone else.
You know, I wanted to just comment because that particular quotation of Christ to Judas, it often reminded me in my modern day life at Ananda Village with Swami Kriyananda. He had a way of just thinking really big about projects and going out and just doing all these different things that might be expensive or not. And it would be really easy to think, why is he doing that? You know, and why does it have to cost that much, you know, or something like that? Which there were plenty of people who would think that way. And invariably it was about not the what, but the how. In other words, why the Crystal Hermitage? You know, this beautiful place. Why not a simple yurt, you know, for him to live in or something? And the key is non-attachment. He was not attached. He could walk away from it like that. He was never attached to it. He was doing as he felt guided, and being who he was and what was coming through him. It was often big things, right? But, you know, for many people, that was a test. It was a big test. And Judas and Christ in this situation, in part, it was about Judas's judgment Christ was calling him on. You're judging this woman, and she is just simply offering devotion from her heart and purely, and you're judging her. So, you know, that was at least one of the layers that was going on also in that story. And I bring this other thing up because it's, you know, of current times, with Swami Kriyananda, because it's just such a common thing for us to fall into. I remember watching the movie about the life of Martin Luther King, and I think it opens up when he's in Helsinki getting his Nobel Prize, and he, you know, is wearing this tuxedo, and his wife's trying to tie the you know, whatever you call that, around his neck, and he's feeling like, you know, but this doesn't relate to the people I'm trying to help who are poor. And yet it was right for that moment for him to be there and wearing that and doing that. And so there's this concern about appearances, and there's this concern about how we think it should look. but in reality, it's about the judgment that comes. That's the real stickler, the fly in the ointment, as it were. So I don't know if that helps, but
Sort of reminds me of the issue of white privilege, because it looks like what it looks like in a certain context. And as I sort of mentioned in my note, I earned it, meaning it's an opportunity. But, you know, once you go down the racial divide, once you slice that thing, then what you have automatically is a war. You have an automatically, this is different than that. This person is different than that. There's no way to get past that. So I hear that expression a lot, and I understand more or less what people mean, but it doesn't really do any good, you know. I can't help being born the way I was any more than somebody else being born black or whatever. The question always comes down to, what do I do about it? What do I do about my situation, and how do I treat other people? I mean, I was thinking the other day, I mean, I don't know much about, you know, black history, quote unquote, as it's taught in colleges, but I can name a number of geniuses and saints who are black, you know. So why people make these distinctions is obviously ignorance. And there are ignorant people, as Yogananda would say of East and West, it's 50-50. He says, you call them heathens, but you don't know what they call you. And I would add, heathens. And that's how it is, you know. Once you, it's like men and women or whatever, once you draw a line in the sand, then you have a war. It's like, well, you know, you've made those differences. So it doesn't help, in other words. But what can people do? I don't know. What can people do?
Just what we're doing now.
have discussion.
Yeah, and realizing our unity. Like I love just all the videos that are people all around the world collaborating on things, and it's just, I don't know, the human spirit somehow finds a way of rising above any limitations that there are. So it's just another opportunity to find the higher good in it all. And yeah, there's struggle and there's bad things, but it's all a really good growing process that we need right now.
No, it's true that there's the other side. I don't know. I don't generally believe things that I read. I learned that back in the 60s, but I did read that that the trashing of the Bellevue Mall here locally was undertaken by a gang who wanted to take advantage of the situation. So there are people who have nothing to do with the issues as we're viewing them, or as society is viewing them, black and white and all that, who simply want to cause trouble, who want to take advantage of the situation and hurt other people, steal, what have you. And that element, which has nothing to do with a racial divide, it's actually the real divide is in consciousness, isn't it? And so that element of consciousness that wants to destroy, to hurt, etc., plays a role in what we're seeing unfolding. And among, whether it's peace protesters who maybe destroy things, I don't know, or it doesn't matter, that element exists in human consciousness no matter what the skin color, no matter what the social status or economic status, education. And so these volatile situations, and it'll be just as true if the economy goes south in a big way. The pandemic's been held under check more or less, but has also been very controversial with some subgroups refusing to cooperate, etc., as some might put it. That's not how they would put it. So there's always that anti-element to anything that goes on, even the very goodness of things, as one group might view it, is going to be antithetical to another group.
You know, I was thinking about this subject today, and then as our friends, the farmers, walked in, I was reflecting on what they do, and it made me think about George Washington Carver, because he certainly himself, in the time that he lived in the South, experienced a lot of prejudice and a lot of setbacks. And he just had his relationship with God and asked God how God wanted to use him, and God decided to talk to him about the peanut. And by following that thread, he improved and affected the economy of the South, and his brothers and sisters, especially in the South, and revolutionized much of, the Industrial Revolution that was going on at the time, with just the humble little peanut. So all that to say is we each have our role to play. We each have our calling. For some it might be to teach meditation and yoga and do prayers, like we're going to do the affirmation shortly about the being a spiritual warrior for the light. And for someone else, it might be to grow lots of plants and food and help to feed others, or change the economy of this island or this state, or some magical discovery that hasn't been discovered yet that is going to... I remember Swami Kriyananda being asked at a question at the Palace of Fine Arts in the early 70s, when he went down to give a talk there about energy and oil and what was going to happen when we run out of oil. And his response was, God takes care of those things. At the point where that starts to happen, something new will be discovered. There will be some new revolution around sources of energy, and that will just take over. That's what makes the world go around. That's the way these things work. And so I think that's true, and I think we're seemingly at a crossroads right now. We are at a crossroads in many ways as a culture, and it may last a very long time. In fact, our guru says it will last a very long time. I may not be around to get to see it, but there will be a transition, and we do live in an ascendant age, and solutions will be found. I know I'm just heartened, and you guys probably know this, you're young enough, our daughter and our son, they don't even think about the differences between people, races, cultures, genders, any of it. I mean, they don't even use the word tolerance, because there's nothing to tolerate. It just is. It's just, if there's a different DNA that's coming through now in these next generations. At least I've seen it, and it may not be widespread enough yet, but it's coming. and it will come, and it will change things. So,
You know, I remember when we did the Martin Luther King program, there was one quote that I recall. He said, I'll paraphrase it, he said, "Black Americans have suffered in such a way that the time is coming," and this was before Barack Obama was elected, obviously, because King died in 63 or 4. The time is coming, he said, because Black Americans have suffered in a way and have lived in a way that they understand both white culture and their own, that they will be able to take up positions of leadership in this country because of what they've gone through. And then years went by. I mean, then we were doing our programs over these years, and then Obama was elected. And I, at the time, I'm sure wasn't alone, a lot of people were somewhat hopeful. And yet, what I perceived is that he was very badly treated as a president. There were other things going on. It was a complicated time. But I was really somewhat surprised, for someone who isn't easily surprised, by how much vilification was thrown at Obama during those years. Whatever his policies were, it didn't matter. I mean, he clearly was an intelligent, sincere person. Doesn't mean he was perfect, but he didn't seem to deserve the vile or the bile that was sent at him. So it's going to take like I said in the very beginning, we need to see the long road, and we don't know what that road looks like. But this thing that's going on can only be really positive. I don't see any other way to see it, because it means more people, are waking up to certain things that are very wrong.
okay. Let's see, what kind of chant do we do with that? Shall we chant and meditate for a few minutes?
Let nothing disturb you.
Do you want to do that?
Okay. I'll just take it.
Oops. She's going to do it.
Oh, good, because I don't play it very often. So is she. You? Okay. Great, thank you. Oh, you want the table?
No, it's fine. She wants the floor.
She wants the floor.
This is Peony, if you can't see her, and this is her birthday week.
No, birthday month.
That's right. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass.
our God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. Let's sit upright for a brief meditation. Holding at the spiritual eye, the light that emanates throughout this world, that emanates within each soul, within every cell of creation. Let's meditate briefly on attunement with that light. I'd like to close this evening with the affirmation together on the Warrior of Light. This morning at the 8 o'clock Warrior of Light broadcast, Davy changed a little bit the last part of the affirmation, so I'm going to do it the new way. Please affirm with me out loud, then in a speaking voice, then in a whisper, and then silently, mentally. God's light is within me and around me.
God's light is within me and around me.
With the sword of faith in my hand.
With the sword of faith in my hand.
With the love of God in my heart.
With the love of God in my heart.
I am a warrior of light.
I am a warrior of light.
I join my brothers and sisters everywhere.
I join my brothers and sisters everywhere.
To overcome fear with faith.
To overcome fear with faith.
Hatred with love.
Hatred with love.
And disease with health.
And disease with health.
We are all warriors of light.
We are all warriors of light.
We will fill the world with God's light.
We will fill the world with God's light.
God's light is within me and around me.
God's light is within me and around me.
With the sword of faith in my hand.
With the sword of faith in my hand.
With the love of God in my heart.
With the love of God in my heart.
I am a warrior of light.
I am a warrior of light.
I join my brothers and sisters everywhere.
I join my brothers and sisters everywhere.
To overcome fear with faith.
To overcome fear with faith.
Hatred with love.
Hatred with love.
And disease with health.
And disease with health.
We are all warriors of light.
We are all warriors of light.
We will fill the world with God's light.
We will fill the world with God's light.
Now in a whisper, God's light is within me and around me. With the sword of faith in my hand. With the love of God in my heart. I am a warrior of light. I join my brothers and sisters everywhere. To overcome fear with faith. Hatred with love. And disease with health. We are all warriors of light. We will fill the world with God's light. And now silently, mentally only, God's light is within me and around me, with the sword of faith in my hand, with the love of God in my heart. I am a warrior of light. I join my brothers and sisters everywhere to overcome fear with faith, hatred with love, and disease with health. We are all warriors of light. We will fill this world with God's light. Om Shanti Shanti. Thank you all. Glad we could have a little time together, and we look forward to seeing you all on Sunday as we live stream Sunday service at 9:30 in the morning from the temple. And the farmers here will be present as our farm choir, and after service from 12 to 3 out in the parking lot, there will be having a plant sale, and Bima will be coming and having crystals from East West for folks to look at and purchase. And we ask people to please wear their masks and to honor social distancing, but it's out of doors, so it should be a lot of fun to see each other again. And we'll have tents there in case, covering the plants and the crystals and the human beings in case it's drizzling, but don't worry about it. Right now it's showing it's going to be clear just in that window from 12 to 3. And then, of course, join us daily at noon weekdays for Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Yogananda. And is there anything else coming up? I think that's it. Thank you.